Welcome from my side. Very happy to be here on stage and lead this panel, as Melody said, towards the best practice in radioligand therapy from inception to implementation. So this panel here wants to focus on the Canadian national perspective, bring together the Canadian leaders from regulatory bodies, academia, and healthcare organizations, looking in their expertise basically to advancing the radioligand therapy. And James mentioned before, double the isotope production in Canada. And it's not just doubling the isotope production, but you need then also to double the need or the consumption basically of this isotope. And then that's a great segue towards this panel here. And I'm very happy to make a first introduction round. Perhaps to me, Marco Harfenstellar, I'm COO of ITM. Since 2008 with ITM. ITM is the largest manufacturer of lutetium-177. We have this excellent collaboration in Canada with Bruce Power and Isogen for the irradiation of material in the CANDU reactors. And we are also, our second leg in Canada is basically a joint venture Actinium with CNL, and we want to produce actinium-225 in Canada and made this available. So trying from Germany to contribute to this isotope production in Canada. So far to me, and I hand over to Céline for a short intro.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for having us. My name is Céline Landié. I am the Vice President for Radioligand Therapy at Novartis, Canada. So my role is essentially to bring Lutathera and Pluvicto to patients.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sara Dolatshahi. I'm the Director of Strategic Projects with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. NWMO is a not-for-profit organization and that is funded by the waste owner and is responsible for high-level waste and intermediate-level waste. I do have 27 years in the nuclear industry from the power plant operations, and now I'm happy to be, towards the end of the fuel cycle, which is with the nuclear waste management.
Good morning. My name is Neil Babcock. I'm from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, Canada's nuclear regulator. I'm a project officer and designated officer in the Nuclear Substance and Radiation Devices program. So that program deals with every single nuclear medicine end user in the country, a large number of processing and distribution companies, as well as research and development, both commercial and in academia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Duncan Sutherland. I'm a nuclear medicine physician at London Health Sciences Centre. I'm the thyroid lead. I provide treatments in the spaces of prostate cancer, thyroid cancer, as well as neuroendocrine tumors. I've also done a fellowship at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Australia, where I was exposed to a number of radio tracers as well.
Thank you all, and happy to have you here on stage. Let's start with the questions. Céline, for you, first one on the radioligand therapy. What do you see as, from an industry perspective, are the biggest challenges, inconsistencies, and how this radioligand therapy is delivered or implemented across Canada?
So actually the biggest inconsistency is that it's not consistently delivered across Canada. So access to radioligand therapy remains a challenge in some places. I'm just going to take two examples. Ontario, we still estimate that approximately 15% of patients cannot access radioligand therapy, specifically true if you live in the north. You are more than 15 hours away from a treating center. So it's urgent that we open new centers in Ontario North. We also struggle with access in Manitoba. So we are actually 18 months after Novartis signed the product listing agreement nationally. And 18 months post that date, we still do not have access. The men do not have access to Pluvicto in Canada. There's just not enough workforce available to deliver treatment. And we just don't find that this situation is acceptable. And I'm just going to tell you why we think it's unacceptable. Innovation with no access means nothing. You're going to hear later this morning a wonderful story from John, but I also wanted to bring a story from a patient in Quebec. So this is a story that happens a couple of weeks ago, and I'm actually in Quebec City with the nuclear medicine department, actually walking along the corridor corridor, there's treatment chairs. On one of those chairs, there is a patient on that day, he's actually receiving his 5th injection of Pluvicto, and when he sees that we are actually the Novartis team coming along, he's like, I really want to speak to you because I want to tell my story because I'm coming from far away. A couple months back, this man had asked for medical assistance in dying. The pain from the cancer was just unbearable. He had metastases all over his body. The pain from chemotherapy was unbearable and he just wanted to go. His medical oncologist in Quebec convinced him to take 1 dose of Pluvicto, which he did. After the 2nd injection, his PSA level, which is the marker of cancer, went down to nearly 0. After the 3rd injection, they did a scan, and the scan came fully clear. There was no trace of cancer in his body. And on that day, as I said, he was receiving his 5th injection, and he had canceled his plan for medical assistance in dying. So when you hear those stories, the work that we do matters, and that's the reason why I personally wake up every day, and I'm extremely happy and grateful and try to make Pluvicto and the rest of the radioligand therapies available to all the cancer patients who need that treatment.
Thank you, very impressive. And I like to hear these patient stories because it keeps all of us motivated doing this daily job. It's not easy to have these melting ice cubes shipped around and deliver the patient doses, administer the patient doses to the patients, so it's really tough. But if you see really the patients saying thank you and they really appreciate this treatment or get better after this treatment, it's really a big, big motivation. Duncan, how is it basically also in your hospital for these patients, but how to get a feedback here? But moreover, also, what are your lessons learned on this implementation of this new radioligand therapy? When you've done iodine therapies and so on before, is it so different, or what are the new challenges?
Challenges with respect to therapy? I can echo a lot of what my colleagues said. It is challenging to provide treatment. We cover people as far north as Thunder Bay, Ontario, so they're multiple hours away. What I have to say is that medical imaging and theranostics is a team sport. You have to have a lot of people involved. We wouldn't be able to do any of the work we do without our technologists who help run the equipment, our specialized nurses who help provide the treatment, as well as an excellent therapy team. Multiple people, multiple multidisciplinary rounds, and it's really a team sport.
Thank you. And when we've heard Céline before saying, for example, Northern Ontario and so on, there's a scarce treatment because of just the expertise missing in there. Do you see, or what would you, from your perspective, see what should be done here across Canada?
So it's been mentioned before in this conference, you really need a hub and spoke model where we have to appreciate how big Canada is, and not every hospital is going to be able to provide radioligand therapy, but they should know the referral pathways to send them to someone who can then provide that radioligand therapy. That's one of the bigger challenges with respect to Canada, and one of the bigger opportunities for some of our bigger centers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Just to continue a little bit on this pathway, so we discussed now about basically really the expertise, the physicians, the nurses and so on, but applying these radioligand therapies or these radioactive drugs basically, it's not easy. You cannot not do this in a living room or somewhere else, so you need really the proper environment, a control area, everything. So how do you see the collaboration Duncan, also with the regulators, and what would you see from your perspective should, however, be improved? So
the regulators are very critical to our treatments because they provide essentially the guidance with what we can and cannot do in the hospital. The big challenge that we have is that therapy rooms take up space and you can only treat so many people at one given time. At the end of the day, it becomes the limiting factor in a lot of these theranostic programs, just having a number of rooms. So working with the regulators, understanding what radiation requirements are needed, what the radiation restrictions are required for the patient is essential. And it's almost like every center seems to have to reinvent the wheel. So it would be nice if we could get a regulatory document. These are the number of days that you need to try and avoid pregnant women, small children. Here are the number of days you have to be arm's length from other people, so that some of these smaller centers can actually counsel their patients before they come to the larger centers.
Okay, thank you. And so if you want to open a new center or you want to adopt a new therapy and prepare your center for that, of course you have to interact basically with licensing authorities. How you see there the collaboration, or is it easy to say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to implement any actinium or alpha therapy, or how's the situation?
So if you don't have an established theranostic center in your hospital, it is a bit challenging because there's requirements with respect to the amount of lead in the walls. There's requirements with respect to actually storing the radio tracers once you've used them, and any waste products afterwards. And so knowing those regulatory hurdles and knowing how to address them, as well as recruiting the nurses who will be working with your patients, the technologists who will be working with the patients, and making sure you have appropriate infrastructure in place. A lot of these scans require you to have PET camera to make a staging decision, and then from that PET camera, whether or not they can even respond to the therapy. In addition, there have been some talks at this conference with respect to SPECT-CT imaging post-therapy. If you do that every single cycle for something like Pluvicto, that's an additional 6 SPECT-CT scans that you have to do. So there are a number of nuclear medicine departments that don't offer theranostic therapy, and it would be challenging, given the current infrastructure that they have, to offer it, because there's just a high degree of burden with respect to imaging.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Duncan. Neil, perhaps to you, now from the regulatory perspective, if you see, okay, we need to open more centers in Canada to make this new therapy available also around all the provinces, also in remote areas, what would you wish from basically these applicants of new centers, how they approach you? And
yeah, I think the baseline here is come to us as early as possible. Help us understand what you're looking to do, where you're looking to do it, and the timeline. This also applies to when new isotopes are being used, so we can consult with our experts in radiation protection to make sure we're considering the hazards, the instrumentation that's needed, that sort of thing. So that's step one. Step two, and this is a big one, I'm going to put a plug in here for our outreach people, our license application guide is going to be rewritten. That document was published in 2017. So a lot has happened in this field since 2017, as we all know. Later this year, when that document comes out, please provide your comments, help us understand the types of guidelines that you're looking for. Our program covers everything from the single camera, single tech imaging clinic somewhere in rural Ontario or rural Saskatchewan, right through to the big institutions like UHN that have multiple technologies, health physicists on staff. So we would like to hear from those experts, what do you think would help you establish those centers, the protocols, that sort of thing. When we speak of remote access, our mandate is to protect the environment and provide nuclear safety and security for Canadians. That said, there's also the directive on healthcare that came about during the isotope crisis. So I will say that our team very much uses a patient care lens when we look at these when we look at these submissions. For example, Saskatchewan Health Authority reached out to us with their concern about sending patients home for a 7-hour drive after their Pluvicto treatment. We worked on a way that these people could be housed in a safe fashion without putting an extra burden on the hospital. We have looked at when a clinical trial demonstrates efficacy, so you're into phase 3, maybe you don't need to go to an institution with a human research license. Is there another smaller hospital closer to the patient that has capacity to offer the therapy under a standard therapeutic nuclear medicine license? So that's the sort of thing that we can explore. And that's why I say come to us, talk about these things. This is almost like hub and spoke, kind of ad hoc. It's not standard from the regulatory point of view, but these options do exist. Talk to your licensing specialist, and we can start to have some discussions on how we can implement these things as effectively as possible and get as many people access as possible.
Thank you, Neil. And perhaps a question based on that, because you said you're rewriting basically this application manual, if I got it right. How do you see then a kind of a standardization in this process for applications? And on the other hand, if you're standardization, everyone wants this individual solution and so on. How do you cope with that, and in which direction do you see this developing?
So I think one thing to focus on is that we don't, it's Health Canada that takes care of the approval of the drug and including the administration protocols. So we're looking at the radiation safety aspect of the administration protocols and making sure that your workers, members of the public, and the caregivers are protected appropriately. So we do have some of the basics, the caregiver guidelines, for example. Our ICRP recommends no more than 5 millisieverts per year to a caregiver. Well, that paradigm's changed with 6 doses in a treatment protocol. It's not one thyroid ablation dose and that's it. So we have already started discussions internally. How can we deal with this? How can we make sure that the patient is given the best care possible? We know that these people are not well. It's not ideal to change caregivers at your 4th treatment, to somebody that you may not be familiar with or somebody that isn't familiar with your situation. So I think those are the kind of things that we're grappling with, and the more that these questions can come to us ahead of time so that we can start to have the internal discussions, that'll help us as well. And that then once we can have that discussion, we can set a standard for everybody and say, this is what we expect. Now let's talk about what you need for your specific use case.
Well, that's great to hear. So basically really reach out to you and talk, discuss, communicate, not just pick up the phone. Tomorrow I want to do actinium, but perhaps a couple of weeks ahead. Okay, it's very important to have such an open authority and basically willing to discuss this. Before we come to the waste, just Duncan, to you, a very quick question, because I've seen you've been also active in Peter Mac, so if also the Australian experience. I think also here in Canada you have also outpatient treatment, or so to speak, for the radioligand therapies. How is this working? And because I'm coming from Germany, and here we have really inbound patient treatments, so the patients need to stay for a couple of days in the stations, and of course this is a huge impact in all the infrastructure for the hospitals. So how is it in Canada?
Absolutely, there are some differences with respect to the two practices. So to give the example of thyroid cancer, the patients, when they're treated, they're admitted to the hospital over the weekend, and then they're watched for several days. Technologist comes in, measures the radiation dose. Once they drop below a mandated amount, they're discharged home. They come back on Monday for the post-therapy scan and their discussion. At our center, up into a higher level of radiation, the patients are sent directly home, provided that we have assurances that they don't have any small children at home, they don't have any pregnant women at home, they're able to self-isolate with their own bedroom and their own bathroom. So that's a significant difference in that the patients at our center can go home, whereas at Peter Mac they would be admitted usually over the whole weekend. With respect to Pluvicto, it's not as stark. At Peter Mac, they would administer the therapy, make sure they went to the washroom at least once, measure the radiation. At that point, they'd be allowed to go. Some would be kept a bit longer if they had poor renal function, just to have a second attempt at the bathroom, but then they would be sent home that day. That's closer to what we do at our center, administering the drug, measuring the radiation, and if it's below a certain amount, sending them home.
Great, I like it. It's really this, basically the approach to say, okay, what is the best for the patient and the environment, the best compromise. Now, every therapy or everything we do basically in our being here creates waste. So also all these radioligand therapies. And I think from a perspective, of course, we have now Pluvicto, Lutathera, or of course all these iodine therapies, technetium and so on, all approved. But if we are looking now for new developments, basically of new therapies, Sara, can you speak to how to ensure that this waste management is considered also on the long-term stewardship, really keeping pace with all the development and included there?
Thank you for that question. It's actually most often when I go to conferences, unfortunately, waste doesn't get discussed. So I'm really happy that we have a question on waste. And I'm going to start by not necessarily just focusing on this therapy, but just on the radioisotope in general. And as we heard James talking about, like, doubling the radioisotope production, I would say how I see it from my perspective, someone that is in the waste management, and I am thinking about it all the time. I look at it as this is like a train that is picking up speed. It's traveling fast, it's exciting. The engine is the science, and it is all the innovations that's happening. And as I said, I personally myself being part of the industry, it's inspiring and it's exciting. But like any train, there are cars behind it. And one of the cars is the radioactive waste. And that car, it is not disconnected, it is connected, it's coupled, but it has a rattling noise. And that's where I think there are some challenges and some opportunities. So where does it start, or how can we start? It starts with awareness. In Canada, a lot of times people point to the policy or the regulations as if we don't have them, and I would say we do, and it's actually one of the more stronger regulations and policy. NRCan has a policy. Nuclear Waste Management Organization was involved with writing the radioactive waste strategy for all of Canada's waste, and so all of that applies to all the waste owners here, or anyone that is coming across with coming in access with the waste. And so it applies, but so it starts with that awareness, understanding what is your waste, being able to classify it with regards to low-level waste, intermediate-level waste, and high-level waste. And thankfully, with the radioisotopes, most of them are even lower than the low-level waste, so they decay away. But it doesn't mean that there is no waste. We need to look at it from the production side all the way to the end, and what are some of the other things that we could put in place. So for instance, it starts from the beginning when you're designing equipments or designing processes that will produce the radioisotopes. What are the materials that are used? Is there a potential for it to be activated? And if that's activated and those materials become radionuclides that are long-lived, then it becomes, for instance, a nuclear waste management organization's responsibility. A lot of times those roles and responsibilities are not clearly identified, or people are not aware who's responsible for what. And then, of course, segregation based on radioisotopes, based on the decay, and then eventually into the final disposal. So if it becomes a high-level waste and an intermediate-level waste, it goes into a deep geological repository. And Canada is one of the leading companies, or leading countries, I should say, that we do have a site that we are working on, a deep geological repository, which is like an underground network of tunnels as deep as CN Tower is tall. But it's for high-level and intermediate-level waste, not for low-level waste. And low-level waste is really where I would say some collaboration and coordination is needed, because it is the responsibility of the waste owners. There is no centralized company like Nuclear Waste Management Organization currently for the low-level waste. There are companies like Canadian Nuclear Laboratories that take them in, but they don't necessarily always become the ultimate waste owners. So that's where really I look at it as both challenge, but also an opportunity that for if there are companies out here that would want to take on that challenge of coordinating the low-level waste for Canada, that's an opportunity.
If I can maybe just say here, I think, Duncan, you said it's a team, RLT is a team sport, and I agree with this. I think we've been inspired by FIFA coming to the country. Novartis is also looking at partnering, of course, alongside the entire value chain, and I think that's why events like this that connect, all the different companies are so important. We are very interested into waste management at Novartis. We are definitely looking at this very carefully. Right now, inside all the boxes that we deliver to hospitals, we have GPSs. We recycle 100% of those GPSs. This is just the beginning. As I said, we're looking at something much more ambitious when it comes to waste and partnering with hospitals. So stay tuned. We're going to have some announcements to make in the next couple of months, certainly by the end of the year. But I agree with you. I think it's in partnership and it's collaboration across all the different players in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Céline. Yeah, great approach. And actually, because you just mentioned also what Novartis is doing in delivering, I think you have all the experience, of course, internationally. And it's a question to everyone here on the panel who wants to respond. How do you see the international models that Canada can look to as examples to basically improve the delivery of RLT, waste management, but also the best practice? Who wants to take that? Duncan?
So with respect to emulating other models in the world, I think we're doing a good job of that right now. I think the hub and spoke is possibly the best way to do it in Canada. Canada's just too geographically large. When you compare it to peer nations like Britain, France, much smaller than Canada, much denser in terms of population, and much easier to provide management compared to Canada. If you compare it to Australia, Australia is a big desert in the middle of the country, so that's a little bit more like Canada. And then they have a very similar model to us. They have hub and spoke where people are sent to Melbourne, they're sent to Sydney to receive therapy. The one challenge with adopting another country's model outright is that Australia also has a very strong private sector which provides therapy. I suspect the Canadian population would not have the stomach for private radionuclide therapy. So we can hopefully take the best and leave what's left. But I do think we have learned a lot of lessons from peer nations.
Thank you. Yeah,
go ahead, Sara. Go on. With the nuclear waste, I would say we are closely working with the international companies because right now, for instance, NWMO is the only company in the country. And so our counterparts are usually the international organizations. And one thing we could potentially, as I said, learn is that the centralization does help with ensuring that we are not fragmented in our efforts, especially when it comes to low-level waste. And so there are countries like UK that do have a centralized, and I understand Germany has it as well, it's centralized to a point that it includes all of the classification of the waste and not just separation of the based on high-level waste or the low-level waste. So that's one area that we are looking to see if there are any benchmarks that we can do.
Okay. I think with all the waste, I mean, of course, perhaps in other legislation it's easy, but the final disposal is always an issue everywhere. So for the whole design of these nuclear medicines, keeping also in mind, as you mentioned, the whole production cycle, reducing the waste is essential. Céline.
Maybe just a few words how we compare to other countries. I think one of the things that we're looking at doing in Canada is actually to bring specifically Pluvicto earlier in the treatment journey. Right now, Pluvicto is funded for post-chemotherapy, which is essentially when the patients have exhausted all treatment options. Many countries in the world have actually decided to fund Pluvicto earlier, so pre-chemotherapy, even actually earlier than the metastatic stage. So countries like China, like Japan, like of course the US have gone this way, and that's the ambition that we have to bring Pluvicto earlier in the treatment journey. And I think John, in a minute, is going to also talk about this.
Thank you, Céline.
I'd just like to say from the CNSC point of view, we do benchmark with other regulators around the globe to make sure we're harmonized. And I think this is maybe more relevant to the producers to make sure that your incoming raw materials can get into the country and be licensed and that your finished product can get out to end users outside of Canada. A recent example of this was the change to the non-proliferation regulations where you don't require an import license for actinium-225 anymore. That's been removed. So that's an administrative burden that we've been able to remove. Similarly, many of you in this room have probably gone through the nuclear medicine consolidation, license consolidation. So now instead of having a diagnostic, therapeutic, and human research license, you can have them all on one license. Less paperwork, less records to maintain, less reporting, and let the people that are the radiation protection experts and the health physicists do clinical work rather than just doing paperwork for the CNSC and triplicate. So that's the kind of approaches that we're taking, and that's based on some examples that we saw in other countries around the world and how they manage their nuclear medicine programs.
Amazing. It's great to hear from authority. Just if you are discussing about authorities, perhaps also towards a federal government. So also to all of you, what would you wish basically that the federal government plays a role in enabling long-term growth of RLT? So not just, of course, providing capacity for authorities, but also particularly in funding, coordination, infrastructure development. Any ideas towards that? Desires?
I mean, I can maybe go right again. If we continue on the sport analogy, I mean, we probably want the federal government to be sort of on the field with all of us. I mean, as you said, right, we are still experimenting, shortage in terms of workforce. We see pockets of extremely strong center of excellence. We see opportunities for more funding, more sharing of best practices across. The federal government said that medical isotope is part of a Canadian strategy. I think it's now time to really sort of go deep and transform that strategy into actions. And we want radioligand therapy to be part of that action plan.
And sorry, because in the beginning you mentioned also that it takes quite long to get basically Pluvicto in all the provinces and so on. To see also some leeway there or some wishes from industry for the government to simplify the licensing or
faster access.
Very simple. Okay. Duncan, you wanted to add something?
In terms of what we'd hope to see from the federal government would be uniform funding across the country. One of the challenges with Canada is that healthcare is a provincial matter, so they're all done differently, but making sure that there is that funding available, whether or not you live in Halifax or you live in Vancouver, everyone has that level of funding. Provinces can provide distribute it as they see fit, and then hopefully our academic institutions come up with some good ideas and do some good clinical trials and work, but really we want to see the federal government provide funding.
I probably should pass on this one, but I will just say that we are undergoing a digital transformation. We're modernizing our systems, and so we want to maintain that momentum. And the goal is ultimately better service delivery for end users, processors, the pharmaceutical companies. So that's me sitting here as a staff member. I want to see that journey get to an end point where we can really see an improvement in how we're working with you, and then shortening our timelines to do the core work. Mm-hmm.
And for us, NWMO is not a regulatory body, but it's regulatory mandated, or government mandated. And I would say actually we do have a great support from the government, Natural Resources Canada, and actually that's why we were involved with writing the strategy for Canada. And now we have a new mandate, which is for intermediate level waste. But if I could put a plug in for low level waste, which is not our responsibility, that is one area that potentially the industry can benefit from, maybe the government mandating it such that there is a centralized organization that could be looking at it. But those are an area that we are talking with them, and so we do have some discussions with the government.
Thank you, Sara. This leads a little bit to my next question, and I want to join that also with the topic that James brought up this morning, doubling isotope production use, basically I add in Canada. So how would you see that a coordinated national strategy for RLT should look like in practice, and which stakeholders should be implemented, but also, or in addition, where do you see bottlenecks if you're thinking, okay, we want to basically double the isotope or RLT in Canada? What do you think should be removed there in terms of obstacles right away? Duncan.
So I'd say we're moving in that direction. So you have the Pan-Canadian collaboration, which is trying to give us an idea of some guidelines. Obviously, what we're trying to do is define the floor, and then every center of excellence can build the rest of the house. But we want to know what the minimum is. And then in addition to that, I would say having good registry data from all the big centers in Canada so we can share our data and pool it, because we still are a relatively small country compared to other people such as America or China. And being able to pool our data would be very helpful.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I'll just build on the point about the baseline. I think that would be great if the CNIC can contribute to that through the regulatory documents, other guidance, keeping in mind that there are a variety of, as I said, variety of institutions across the country who have different needs. But I think, any time we can standardize so that you can come to us and say, we're demonstrating we're meeting your minimum requirements, and everybody knows what those minimum requirements are, that will make assessment and licensing of that technique that much easier for us.
Perhaps one thing regarding the waste also that from my perspective, or ITM's perspective, I want to add. So it's really for industry also to deliver the proper isotopes in the proper quality. So when we look back, basically in the history of lutetium, you had the two different qualities of lutetium, non-carrier added, and now the standard carrier added with a long-lived impurity before. I think this is important really when you develop new radioligand therapies, think of these long-lived isotopes. Same as, for example, with actinium-227. That's an approach from Department of Energy to make this available via spallation. It's also a long-lived contaminant, actinium-227. But on the other hand, with the other routes, you have also radium-226, and you want to make sure that's not in your product and put enough effort in it to have really an excellent recycling rate and really use this basically waste to turn it into medicine. But Sara, you wanted to add something on waste?
It was around the same line, basically, making sure that, from the beginning, you're aware of what is the material that you're using. Is there a potential for it to be activated to become something that's inadvertently a waste in the long term, and it becomes a long-term radionuclide, which you actually don't want to have. But in addition to that, I think that's something maybe, and we only have 30 seconds, we need to think about as a team. I think it's the public confidence, and I think the public confidence, a lot of times we have it, especially for radiotherapy, but at the same time, we are part of that nuclear industry overall. So when we don't, potentially think about our work here, it can affect everybody else in the industry as well. So I'm really happy that we have, the entire ecosystem here today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Céline, anything to close? No, okay, good. But we are anyhow, at the end of our session. So many thanks to give us here the room space and the great audience here. Or are there any questions very quickly at the end? I don't see anything, so I turn over to Melody, to you.